Welcome back to Notes on Power. I'm your host, Tsepo Tebogo Matsimani. This is not an episode about politicians. It's an episode about you. Your time, your patience, your quiet adaptations. Because power rarely announces itself with violence. It shows up as a delay, a form that never loads, a queue that steals your morning and calls it policy. In South Africa right now, nothing is fully broken. And that's the problem. The system still works just enough to keep you compliant, just enough to keep you coping, just enough to make resistance feel impractical. Tonight, we are not chasing villains. We are dissecting behavior, how power survives without trust, how humans adapt to dysfunction, and why exhaustion is one of the most effective tools of control ever invented. So, if you've ever felt tired before you felt angry, if you've ever planned your life around failure instead of expecting better, this episode is already about you. Let's talk about power, the quiet kind, not the movie villain kind, not the shouting politician kind, the quiet kind, the kind that controls your time, the kind that decides how long you wait, the kind that never raises its voice, yet rearranges your life anyway. What power actually is. We grow up thinking power is force. Guns, police, presidents, laws. That's childish. Real power is the ability to shape what feels normal, to decide what people tolerate, to define what people expect. Power is not what can be done. Power is what people stop questioning. In South Africa, power has learned something dangerous. People complain, but they adapt. People are angry, but they still comply. People know the system is broken, but they still queue. This is not a weakness. That is human behavior under prolonged exposure to disappointment. Now, let's talk about the psychological delayed collapse. Here is the uncomfortable truth. Most systems do not collapse when they are corrupt. They collapse when corruption becomes predictable, when incompetence becomes routine, when outrage turns into background noise, when citizens stop expecting better and start planning around failure. South Africa is here. Load shedding becomes a schedule. Government delays become a life skill. Broken systems become personal problems. Power survives not because it is strong, but because people quietly reorganize their lives around its failures. This is not resilience. This is learned adaptation. So, why power no longer needs legitimacy? Power used to need belief. Now it only needs participation. You do not have to trust the system. You just have to use it. Renew your documents, pay your taxes, vote or do not vote. Either way, the machine continues. This is modern power. It does not ask you to believe. It asks you to comply quietly. And the moment citizens confuse survival strategies with empowerment, power relaxes. Because a population that adapts will not rebel, it will cope. Now, let's talk about the economics of obedience. Let's talk money. In South Africa, inefficiency is not neutral. It is classed. The wealthy buy speed. The poor pay with time. Time off work, time in queues, time waiting for systems that do not care. Power understands this. When inefficiency is unevenly distributed, resistance is fragmented. Those who suffer most cannot afford to protest for long. Those who could protest are insulated from suffering. It is power. This is not accidental at all. It is how power stabilizes inequality without violence. So, let's talk about behavior under powerless conditions. Here is what prolonged power imbalance does to human behavior. People stop asking how to fix the system. They ask how to survive it. They stop demanding accountability. They search for connections. They stop believing in institutions. They start believing in favors. This is not moral failure. It is rational adaptation under scarcity. But here is the trap. When everyone plays survival games, no one builds alternatives. Power loves this phase because it can rule without being respected, without being trusted, without being loved. All it needs is exhaustion. Now, the lie of political drama. South Africa looks dramatic. Coalitions, factions, public fights. But drama is not danger to power. Drama is camouflage. As long as politics feels noisy, people mistake motion for change. They argue personalities instead of structures. They debate slogans instead of incentives. Power stays untouched while citizens fight over symbols. This is how power wins without winning elections, by staying structurally irrelevant to blame. So, let's now look at the philosophical core. Every society runs on a shared answer to one question. What do we owe each other? South Africa has not answered this since liberation. The old answer was struggle. The new answer, however, is very much unclear. So, power fills the vacuum with procedure, rules, offices, and committees. But procedure without meaning becomes control. Law without justice becomes management. People feel it even if they cannot articulate it. That is why frustration feels spiritual, why anger feels tired, and why hope feels postponed. So let's now look at how power actually shifts. Here is the part nobody likes. Power does not change because people complain louder. It changes when behavior changes. When citizens stop normalizing dysfunction, when inefficiency becomes reputationally costly, when accountability is enforced locally and not begged for nationally. Power fears coordination more than protest. It fears organized refusal. It fears competence outside itself. History shows this clearly. The most dangerous citizens are not the angry ones. They are the calm ones who stop cooperating with broken norms. The future we are drifting toward. South Africa is not collapsing. It is settling into a low trust equilibrium where nothing fully breaks but nothing truly works. This is the most dangerous phase because people adapt so well that power no longer feels pressure. And once pressure disappears, reform dies quietly. So, power is not evil. It is lazy. It follows incentives. It relaxes when watched poorly. It tightens when challenged intelligently. South Africa is not failing because people are bad. It is failing because power has grown comfortable being mediocre without consequence. And comfort is the enemy of accountability. The question now is no longer who should lead. The question is what behavior citizens are willing to tolerate. Because honestly, power never corrects itself. It is corrected. That is the real struggle. Not in slogans, not in speeches, but in daily refusal to accept nonsense as normal. Here is the uncomfortable truth to sit with. Power does not collapse when it's exposed. It collapses when people stop reorganizing their lives around incompetence. As long as citizens adapt endlessly, power never has to improve. It just has to wait. South Africa is not short of intelligence. It is short of pressure that actually lands. And pressure that doesn't come from outrage alone. It comes from coordination, from refusing to treat dysfunction as normal, and from making mediocrity costly again. Power is not a monster, it's a mirror. It reflects what people tolerate for long enough. So the real question is not who should lead us. In fact, the real question is, what are we willing to stop absorbing quietly? Because power never gives back what it isn't forced to defend. This was Notes on Power, where we don't shout at the system, we study it until it has nowhere left to hide. Until next time, thank you for joining us.